Hello, this is part one, the overview of this content on measuring variables. And I think that I will say that this is some of the more important content of our class, because measuring variables is something that is a big part of what you're going to do for your final project. So I've really just sort of copied what I had written on the web page on our Blackboard site. So when we think of measurement, we usually think of physical measures like miles or kilometers or scales or rulers or thermometers, things like that. And so why are we thinking about these things in a research course? Well, science is all about measurement. So imagine that a doctor has a new salve that she thinks will reduce severity of a rash. So she has to measure rash severity to see if it will work. A pet owner hopes that his dog will learn to come to a whistle if he gives the dog a treat each time. So he has to somehow count or measure the extent to which the dog complies to the whistle blow. A shop owner thinks that customers will spend a little more money if he puts small items like gum right next to the cash register. So he's got to measure, somehow tally up the spending on these small items. A coach thinks that his runners will have a higher endurance if they eat a high-carb meal like spaghetti the night before a run. So she has to measure somehow, what does she mean by runner's endurance and how is she going to measure it? So this is the kind of thing you'll be doing. You're going to be forming, these are little mini hypotheses right here, and you're going to be forming hypotheses, and what we're focusing on this week is what it is you're going to measure. So again, I wrote all this on our Blackboard, and I'm just sort of reading it to you and reiterating it. But in social sciences, a lot of times we can't just put a thermometer in and then we have our data. We might be interested in, for example, knowing whether students are more engaged and interested when they take classes in person versus taking the same class online. In order to know if there's a difference, though, we have to find a way to measure student engagement, and we can't just put a thermometer in it or put a ruler up against it. How can we measure it? Variables like these, like student engagement, things that we can't directly observe, are called constructs. Ideas that we can't see, we can't observe, and we can't put a tight boundary around. They may consist of clusters of ideas that are bound together in some way that have to be conceptually defined. For example, student engagement might consist of things like alertness, interest, involvement, responsiveness. When all of these come together in some way, we say that student engagement is high. Here are some other examples of constructs. Depression. It's a construct. Gratitude, pro-social behavior, awe, need for cognition, need for affiliation, compassion, intolerance. All of these are ideas that we have about people, but we can't directly observe them. So as researchers, going down to this last sentence, we have to define these constructs, find ways to measure them, and make sure our measurement tool is valid and reliable. So just reviewing a little bit, what is a variable? This is from stats, but I know some of you did not take stats as the prereq. And so a variable is any property or characteristic that can vary across a population, or a property of people or objects that takes on two or more values. So let's see what this means. So here we have a bunch of humans on the right, and they vary in a bunch of ways. They vary by height. Some are taller than others. They vary by color. They're all different colors. They vary by sex. Some are male, some are female. So at least in this little sample of people, the variables are height, color, and sex, the ways that these people differ. The saguaro cacti could also be sort of subjects about which things can vary. So they vary by height, by the number of arms, by the number of ridges, spines, by the diameter at the base, and many other things. And those things are the variables. And so maybe you can look around you in the room that you're in and think about ways that the room that you're in might be different from the room that I'm in or that some of your classmates are in. What are some of the variables or things that might vary or differ among these rooms? And next, let's just take a review of what is the dependent variable. We call this the DV. The dependent variable is what is being measured. It's the variable that you're interested in. It's the variable that might differ if you create different circumstances. It's the variable that might be affected by some condition imposed by the researcher. We worked with this a lot in statistics, and so you should be familiar, but just this one example, we're not talking yet about the independent variable, so don't even worry about it. Just think about the dependent variable. So here's a little experiment. Our test scores impacted by the amount of time spent sleeping the night before a test. The dependent variable is the test score. That is what we're measuring. That's what we're interested in. That's the variable that might differ depending on whether sleep has occurred, or it's the variable that is affected by the researcher-imposed sleep condition. And again, DV is the common abbreviation. So what are we going to do this week? Well, first we're going to identify psychological constructs of interest to you. We're going to create conceptual definition of constructs, explore different levels of measurement for these constructs, create operational definitions of these constructs, determine how to know whether our measurement tool is any good, in other words, reliability and validity. We're going to read a research study and analyze what is the dependent variable. And you're going to take your first step at choosing and conceptualizing your own dependent variable. So on we go.